We are now live on YouTube.
Should we start, Shantanu?
Yes, ma'am, we can start now.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Myself, Garima Rohela, I'm director in AICT. And on the behalf of AICT, I welcome all the participants who are attending the webinar and spare their valuable time for this delicate talk, basically, you can say. And I especially welcome Change Inc., who have given the initiative for awareness of inclusion of students with specific learning disabilities in higher education with hand-holding with AICT, basically. It is our collective responsibility to ensure that every individual gets the opportunity to learn and work in appropriate environment. Differently able people have strong willpower, but they need some support from the system. And the AICT wants to make sure that all differently able students are aware of opportunity and initiatives for their growth and learning process. And for this, AICT is running many schemes. One of them is Saksham for differently able students. And there is a SWAM platform in AICT for providing MOOCs for differently able students. From last 2 years, AICT had conducted many webinars on PWD students. In 2021, webinar was on dyslexia, in which the panelists expressed their views on the problems related to dyslexia and also the importance of awareness regarding dyslexia. In next webinar, the area for improvement in dyslexic children were identified and shared many online tools for dyslexic students. Last year also ICT had conducted the 5 webinars on inclusion of specific disability in university and educational institutes. Finally, I'm sure that you all be benefited from the webinar, and I wish this happens to be a wonderful session. Now you can start, Bhavya.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction, Garima ma'am. Okay, so I'll just give a brief introduction about changing. So at Changing Foundation, we are building equitable ecosystems that accelerate mainstreaming inclusion of over 200 million Indians with specific learning disabilities. Our approach focuses from cradle to career to drive innovation, productivity, and growth for India to become a $10 trillion economy by 2035. Today's webinar is going to focus on the inclusion of students with specific learning disabilities in higher education. Before we begin, I would like all of you to scan this QR code and to take a quick survey that will help us gauge how the presentation went. Okay, I'll now begin with the session. Okay, so Looking at the picture, can you tell me who, according to you, has a specific learning disability? You can unmute or you can tell us on chat. But out of the five people, who do you think has a specific learning disability? Okay, so the point of this activity was would have been to show that you can't tell whether a person has a specific learning disability just by looking at them. It's an invisible disability, and it's impossible to tell whether a person has it without proper diagnosis, psychometric testing. Now let's understand neurodiversity a bit better. So, neurodiversity is an umbrella term that includes specific learning disabilities, which include dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and dyspraxia. And neurodiversity also includes autism and ADHD. It refers to differences in the way people's brains function, process, and learn information. Individuals with specific learning disabilities have average or above average IQ. That's a thing they want to rule out. That's a test they rule out before going for a further diagnosis. It's a lifelong condition that runs in families. With access to accommodations and assistive technologies, these individuals can excel through their lifetime. Like we mentioned, it's an invisible disability and can be diagnosed through psychometric testing. Unemployment and underemployment are key challenges. Dyslexia affects at least 1 in 5 people. That's a global statistic. Now let's understand how specific learning disabilities manifest. So this is a simulation to show you in dyslexia, the letters move around, they mirror, the words can look a bit jumbled up. Dyslexia accounts for at least 80% of all specific learning disabilities. In dyscalculia, math is impacted, numerical application, quantification, formula, that is the part that is impacted in dyscalculia, and that affects about 5% of the population. Dysgraphia impacts writing, so it's diagnosed in childhood and it affects a person's handwriting ability and fine motor skills, like holding the pen or the pencil. We'll now watch a video to learn from Vivek's journey.
The refrain was उसको आता सब कुछ है ये पता नहीं एग्जाम में क्या करता है because when it came to spelling my grammar was all over the place and for whatever reasons I'm good at maths, my science was good, but if everything had to be judged by the written words, then that used to fail me. And for me, then I never looked, but I was very good at maths. I gave my JEE twice. I cleared both the times. I wanted to do physics. I came and did physics. And again, the thing is that JEE again is a paper which does not judge you on your on your written skill. It's basically your logic and the maths. So there I've excelled. I was lucky enough to work for InfoEdge Group, which was a startup. And these places, I mean, the thing is, if you're good, it's pure meritocracy. So if you're good, you keep getting the opportunities.
So, from Vivek's journey, we learn that if the system judges you on what you can't do, that's always going to hinder your performance. But if the system helps you leverage your strengths, you can reach several heights. And he was a boy who couldn't write a simple sentence, and he's a graduate of IIT Kanpur, and he's an angel investor behind several leading Indian startups like the InfoEdge Group, Zomato, Naukri.com, etc. So we'll dive into a quick activity. Can somebody volunteer to read this text in 60 seconds? Yeah, I see your hand. You can unmute and go ahead.
Okay. So it is we beginning our trip at a familiar place. Dobby, like yours, am view. T contains a neural trilio cells that mock together GQC ab within each of these view cells, each out that has DNA. The DNA copy is exactly the zoo. It is very difficult to understand that what it is written.
Yeah, so it is very difficult to read, and this was just to give you a sense of how a person with dyslexia would have read that text, or how it wouldn't have made sense to them just looking at it as a chunk. But here's the correct
Now it
text.
is, yeah, we begin our trip at a familiar place, yeah.
Yeah.
A body like yours
Um,
and mine. Okay,
we'll do another quick activity. So
sure.
here you're supposed to read the color and not the word
Mm-hmm.
that is written, and you have to do it really quickly.
Okay. It is the first one is violet, then it's gray, and then red. Yellow, gray, black, gray, red, and then purple. Then in the last, it is black, yellow, and I think so violet.
Yeah, so this was another activity to show that people with dyslexia, so you're supposed to do it really quick, and then people get a little confused with the color and the word. And this is again supposed to show that they often struggle with instructions, or just cues can be overwhelming. So, dyslexia and dyslexic struggles always affect three aspects of a person's life. They will always impact academics, life skills, and emotional well being. When an individual is struggling in all of these areas, only then will we believe that they are at risk and suggest a further screening or a diagnosis. Beyond language processing, specific learning disabilities also impact an individual's executive functioning. So they often struggle with poor self-esteem. They've throughout their life they've faced judgments about their IQ based on reading and writing capabilities, and that can often spark emotions and frustrations and can result in poor self-esteem. They often struggle with memory challenges. They can forget tasks very easily or deadlines, and if they're provided multiple instructions at once, it's very overwhelming for them to keep up with that. They are very sensitive to overstimulation. They often struggle with concentrating due to movement, sound, light, additional noise. There is often a gap in their oral and written performance, so they are extremely good communicators verbally, but their writing skills might be very poor. They process information a little bit slowly, they take a little longer to understand information that is given in print or in writing. They often have difficulties in planning. They struggle with time management, and that can in turn affect their ability to plan tasks and manage deadlines. Screening and identification. So, in India, as per the RPWD Act 2016, diagnosis of specific learning disabilities can happen only in or after third grade or at 8 years of age, whichever comes earlier. Um, RPWD Act now recognizes specific learning disabilities formally. Um, so, under screening, a formal diagnosis can only be done after 8 years, but a process of screening can be undertaken for early identification of a child who might be at risk of an SLD and is exhibiting struggles in areas of emotional well being, life skills, and academics as well. And screening is a process that is very similar to taking a child to get their eyes tested because there are regular complaints of a headache. As part of a screening process, one again must not assess just the academic performance, but also assess the impact of the disability on their daily life and their well being. Screening, a very important thing to note, must be done in the child's primary language. Moving on to diagnosis. So, a diagnosis requires specialists that can be either a pediatrician, a psychiatrist, a pediatric neurologist, or a clinical or rehabilitation psychologist. It's a three-step process. So, the first is to eliminate any other disability, whether it's visual or hearing impairment. So, that has to be ruled out. The second step is an IQ assessment. So, a child psychologist or a clinical psychologist or any specialist is going to determine whether the child's IQ is average or above average, and that is essential to move to the next step. The last step is an SLD assessment, which involves application of specific psychometric testing for diagnosing specific learning disabilities and giving it a severity scale. And the benchmark is at 40%. So once a disability diagnosis is confirmed, a disability certificate and a UDID, the same thing, or a UDID card can be issued by the competent authority. And this certificate is needed to access any facilities, benefits, reservations, concessions that are available under government schemes for people with disabilities. Dyslexic are extremely resilient individuals. With the right kind of support, they find ways to cope and they succeed. We'll now learn from another individual's journey.
I was a cheater in class, and I'll tell you why. Because in math class, when she'd ask me or he would ask me to show the working, I wouldn't have it, right? So they always assumed I copied it from my peer sitting next to me. And then the peer said, no, I got the wrong answer. So this guy's figured it out in some way or form. So, you went through that a few times because our brains just think differently, and we tend to understand what is being said before the other person is finished saying what they're saying. And that becomes very unnerving. I didn't know my ABCDs till the fifth grade, to be very honest. The only reason I could write my name was because there was another Kunal in my class. He wrote it, I memorized it, and I simply copied it. It was as simple as that. In the younger classes, I would sit at the back. So by the time the class finished reading the chapter twice, I had memorized it. So I would just pick up on where the person dropped off and recite from my memory. My sister started a computer class in the eighth grade, and I was in the fifth. And I got intrigued by the fact that she was typing something on this electronic device, and it was doing something magical on the screen. And I picked up on that, and I started sort of spending my breaks in the computer lab, bugging the teachers and the assistants to teach me what they were doing. By the time I hit my seventh grade, I was actually doing 10th grade level programming and college school projects, and that's what became my go-to thing as an out for my lack of success in academia. And the school encouraged it. My friends encouraged it, and that's when I decided right on my eighth grade to get a full-time job.
So Kunal's journey is a rare find because back then it was really hard to find an inclusive school that would support a student. But we understand that when that happens, when early intervention, when a child is supported from the get go, they can really make it big. Kunal today is the founder and MD of AirPay, which is one of India's leading fintech firms. Okay. So dyslexia actually powers our life. If you think about it, every invention that has been a groundbreaking invention or something that has really contributed to development, there is a dyslexic mind behind it. Albert Einstein had dyslexia. Thomas Edison, inventor of the light bulb, had dyslexia. Alexander Graham Bell had dyslexia. Henry Ford, Wright brothers, Steve Jobs, Bill Hewitt. Everybody had dyslexia. When the minds are supported, when their strengths are leveraged, they can change our lives. These are all inventions that have contributed immensely to fields that emerged from them. And this is just for you to understand that dyslexia actually powers our life. It's not people who are simply struggling with the basics and not excelling. Another statistic is that 40% self made millionaires are dyslexic. So, all the icons on the screen, the founders of all of these leading companies were dyslexic. Virgin Group, Walt Disney, CNN Network being some of them. Dyslexic thinking actually drives us all forward. They're very innovative minds, and therefore we keep pushing for this narrative of inclusion for innovation. Include these people, include these individuals because they will change your life. You must be wondering, how does a mind that can't process language manage to make such an impact? Um, this is We'll dive into that. So Richard Branson actually quotes that I simply wouldn't be where I am today if I wasn't dyslexic. In the real world, dyslexia can be a huge advantage. Many people with dyslexia have great imagination, creativity, and problem solving skills. He's referred to some of the things that we're about to cover, but the phenomenon is referred to as the dyslexic edge, which is certain qualities or certain skills that these people have because of their dyslexia. So, global studies have shown that the percentage of students with dyslexia in the fields such as engineering, arts, entrepreneurship are over twice the percentage of individuals with dyslexia in the general population, and that is because of these skills. So, visualizing, innovating, communication, reasoning, connecting, so being able to see a connection between two things which might not be very obvious to a typical mind, problem solving, and being able to see the bigger picture. Top universities globally are attracting students with specific learning disabilities. Dyslexia is so common at MIT that it is known as the MIT disease. Um, Yale, Brown, Stanford, UC Berkeley, Ashoka, and IIM Bangalore in India are some of the universities that are really providing accommodations and attracting students with specific learning disabilities because they know what they can contribute to the world. There are several struggles that come with transitioning to a higher education institute. We spread them across three spheres. So, on campus life, a student will suffer with disclosure and self advocacy because their entire life they've been judged. So, it's really hard for them to understand whether they can tell the college authorities that this is something that I struggle with and these are my rights, and I'm going to um, need some handholding and some support. They often struggle with bullying, rejection, stonewalling from their peers. They also struggle with managing daily tasks independently. Like we discussed, executive function, it's really overwhelming for them to keep up with their entire schedule, and they often need support systems. With academic life, they often struggle in the classroom with reading, writing, note taking. They also struggle with managing academic tasks like planning, submitting their assignments on time, exams, just overall academic planning given their course load, and with balancing academic and college life pressures. Their emotional well being also often gets affected. There is always a risk of low self esteem and depression. They're often overwhelmed with managing a new environment. Peer pressure, high levels of anxiety, and risk of overstimulation are again some of the factors that contribute to their emotional well being. Now, let's get into what India is doing to tap into this critical resource pool of dyslexic thinkers. So, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, it formally recognized specific learning disabilities as a disability in India. It defines this group as a heterogeneous group of conditions wherein there is a deficit in processing language, spoken or written, that may manifest itself as a difficulty to comprehend, speak, read, write, spell, or to do mathematical calculations, and includes conditions such as perceptual disabilities, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, and developmental aphasia as well. The RPWD Act mandates higher education institutes to reserve 5% of seats for persons with disabilities in government and government aided institutions. The new education policy is also in complete sync with provisions of the RPWD Act. It mandates that children with disabilities, including those with specific learning disabilities, will be enabled to fully participate in the regular schooling process from the foundational stage to higher education, ensuring equitable access to quality education. Universities and colleges will therefore be required to set up high quality support centers to support these disadvantaged groups to transition to higher education smoothly. What the NEP kind of suggests for the government and for national higher education institutions It suggests that we earmark suitable funds for the education of these disadvantaged groups. There has to be adequate budget allocation, set clear targets for higher gross enrollment ratios. There should be more and more people entering each year. Provide more financial assistance and scholarships to these groups in both public and private institutes. Conducting outreach programs on these opportunities and scholarships for these groups to know that they can avail this. This is their right. And developing support and technology tools for better participation and for better learning outcomes. Now, for institutes, again, more financial assistance and scholarships, conducting outreach and awareness programs to ensure that there's adequate information available on these, making admission processes and the curriculums inclusive, ensure that all buildings and facilities are disabled friendly, so the infrastructure has to be accommodating, develop bridge courses, ensuring that there's counseling and support available for these students on campuses, and ensuring sensitization of faculty members, counselors, and students. Another thing that needs to be enforced very strictly is the no discrimination and anti harassment rules for these groups, and developing institutional plans for action of increasing the participation of these groups overall. So, UGC and AICT have both come up with very comprehensive guidelines. We'll go over what UGC suggests first. So, for transitioning to higher education institutes, there needs to be support provided from both school to college transitions and from college to post graduation transitions. A need assessment board shall be set up to formally assess the needs of these people with disabilities at the beginning of the admission process in the academic year, imparting additional skills like independent living, social interaction, etc., and making scholarships and schemes available for those students to avail the opportunities to educate themselves further. Student life on campus. So, infrastructure, there needs to be universal accessibility. Assignments need to be modified. So, as opposed to traditional exams or the written papers, essay reports with lenient deadlines can be explored. Accommodations during exams need to be available as well. So, compensatory time, preferential seating, providing assistive technology with training, and allowing the use of devices in classrooms is important. Placement and career related advice and assistance is needed as well. Implementation, so to ensure that all of this is in place and is actually being done, all stakeholders need to be sensitized and capacity building at all level needs to be done, faculty, administration, as well as students. The teaching learning methods need to be modified, the faculty need to be trained. Accommodating workload with regards to student deadlines is important. Being a little bit flexible for these cohorts is important. And it's important to spread awareness around success stories and ensuring that the students know that there are potential employers who are going to hire them because they know the skills and the strengths. For governance and monitoring, it's important to have administrative frameworks in place. So, UGC actually recommends an equal opportunity cell and to strengthen institutes to follow these guidelines and to prescribe to UGC's very comprehensive guidelines. This is a unit that needs to be set up, and ideally, a person with disability, somebody with a lived experience, needs to chair and lead these cells and units. AICT has come up with very comprehensive guidelines for students with specific learning disabilities. So they suggest that to promote admissions, one, there needs to be adequate awareness that students with specific learning disabilities can avail admissions under the PWD category. The processes need to be streamlined. Adequate accommodations for students with specific learning disabilities need to be provided for admission. Scholarships and sponsorships need to be taken care of, and they recommend that the disability support unit be set up to take care of this. From student life on campus, AICT recommends that, again, infrastructure needs to be accessible in terms of the built environment as well as assistive technology, hardware, and software, and training needs to be available to be able to use these. In class support needs to be available. Use of technology should be permitted, and the course material, suppose something is given in print, should also be available in an accessible digital format. Exam support needs to be available. Students should have the options of scribes. They need to have 20 more minutes per hour of exam. There should be a balance between the objective and subjective type questions. Computers should be allowed during examinations, and there should be a separation of answer sheets for evaluation for people who are sensitized towards these groups and know how to proceed with the evaluation process. Career related support from internships to hiring and employer sensitization is something that AICT recommends. To implement this smoothly, AICD recommends that SWAYAM courses to train faculty members on accommodation solutions is important. There should be a PWD database management system that monitors the standards of accessibility and that's able to maintain a database showing how many students are enrolled, what their needs are, what's being taken care of. Inclusive pedagogy is something that needs to be in place. So, training faculty members in universal design learning concepts is important. This is going to help them cater to multiple learning styles. Awareness and advocacy needs to be in place. Students and the community around them, they need to know of their rights and something that they have a right to avail to move forward. Community outreach needs to be conducted regularly, as well as college readiness programs. So, targeting students who are in senior secondary education, making them know that these are available options and this is what you can avail. That is something that is important. For governance, AICTE mandates centers of learning diversity for students with specific learning disabilities, and they also mandate equal opportunity facilitation cells and disability support units in all HEIs. They also encourage research on disabilities and encouragement of investment on research and development of assistive tech. They suggest that an adequate budget needs to be allocated to promote activities um, surrounding inclusion for people with disabilities. These inclusion cells that have been listed, they need to be funded. They need to have the required resources and trained manpower to function efficiently. We'll now learn from a student's journey and how he transitioned to higher education.
Rohit was one of our early entrants into higher education. He has multiple flight of stairs to his classroom. But in reality, he actually found it difficult to navigate new schedules, new systems, keeping up with his lectures, getting to his classroom on time, finding his classroom, making new friends. The list was endless. The first day he went to college, he went to the library to get his library cards, and he was pulled up for his illegible handwriting with the comment, "This is what happens when we have to fulfill quotas in admission." Not surprisingly, Rohit struggled through the first term. He was quite miserable. He spent as little time as possible at college, and it was only regular, intensive counseling that kept him on track. His exams came along, the first term exams, and he had discovered that he'd been given extra time to finish his papers, but the seat in the hall had to be vacated because the next exam was scheduled immediately after. And everybody was standing in the corridor and discussing what to do with me. The principal view, he pulled up the staff for not having made adequate arrangements, and he took Rohit with him. I'm going to describe this in his own words, which he told us about later. He said, "Man, he took me to his own office. He sat me down at his desk. He made space there for me. And he told me to finish my paper, take as long as I wanted. And he said, I'm sitting outside making phone calls. Don't worry, nobody's going to disturb you here." What a validation. This validation really changed his life at college. Suddenly, he was able to advocate for himself. He dived into campus activities, took part join some clubs. Ironically, in his last year at college, he took over a student newsletter as editor, and he made so many changes and made it so innovative that it won several awards.
So Rohit, Johnny's actually offers a lot of insights. One where even if accommodations are available, the systems aren't prepared to accommodate these students. Even if extra time was available, there wasn't adequate coordination that was available to ensure that that is not affecting the student. It also shows that having just one person champion your cause can change your life. And it also shows that if a student is just asked to focus on their strengths and they are provided with some support, some handholding, they can really excel. Now, let's try and understand what we can learn from global leaders. So, leading institutions, every university has an initiative to ensure that students with specific learning disabilities are accommodated in their colleges and their universities. So, MIT has a Disability and Access Services Office. Yale has the Yale Center of Dyslexia and Creativity. Um, University of California, Berkeley has the Office of Disability Compliance. Stanford University has Office of Accessible Education and Schwab Learning Center. Ashoka University has Office of Learning Support, and IIM Bangalore has Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Center for Teaching and Learning. We'll now learn from a global expert on inclusion.
And bright or accomplished or educated people have outmoded views of dyslexia. A number of the faculty are dyslexic. And I think we are very, very fortunate that at Yale, that people who are in administration have been very, very supportive. For example, at our Yale Center, anybody that thinks they might have trouble learning or have dyslexia are referred. It's amazing what different stories they have and what different beliefs there are about dyslexia. So we try to speak with the faculty, have them understand, and what people were just saying. I mean, one of the things, for example, is learning a foreign language. We were seeing so many students that were working so hard, students who were dyslexic, uh, and it was taking their time from courses they could succeed in. So very fortunately at Yale, I was able to work with people at the highest levels and suggest that maybe we can have a partial waiver of the foreign language requirement so that people could take a course in English, but based on helping you to understand the country, the culture.
So, diving from Sally's video straight to the pillars of global best practices, um, we've touched upon this, but these global best practices focus on four things: counseling support, academic support, assistive technologies, and research. So, under counseling support, consultations should be available for these students to chart out their path, to personalize their learning. There should be reasonable case by case accommodation available for each student. Awareness and advocacy needs to be in place. Coordinating all stakeholders, there has to be something in place that is coordinating the faculty, admin, and student interactions. There needs to be support provided by a community beyond campus. There needs to be adequate academic support, so curriculum adjustments, inclusive pedagogy, modifying learning environments, both in classroom and outside of classroom. There need to be policies in place regarding attendance, assignments, and exams. For assistive technologies, options need to be available as well as training needs to be available for people to know how to use these technologies. Stanford, for instance, has an assignment calculator which helps students calculate their course load and manage their coursework and deadlines. Yale has a Shavitz dyslexia screener. If a student hasn't been diagnosed and feels like they are at risk, this is an option that is available at Yale. Under research, there's great work being done globally. So Yale actually has dyslexia interventions and several longitudinal studies that they've derived a lot of literature and knowledge from. The McGovern Institute at MIT focuses on a lot of research as well. They study everything from brain imaging to cognitive neuroscience and study dyslexia and reading interventions as well. University of California, Berkeley has invested $20 million to further research in neuroscience and cognition to support dyslexia. We'll now learn from another global expert.
It is the key, basically. Being able to design a curriculum that is inclusive is that where we all kind of strive. And I guess that at university, it can be quite difficult because it is really engaging a variety of academics, a variety of courses, and they all have different challenges. But for example, starting for exams can be really difficult for neurodiverse students and writing under time pressure and so on. So even a change in the way that assessment is done and providing kind of a different way of assessing, not just one way, but so for example, allowing people to show what they know in different ways. And it could be by writing, it could be by presenting, it could be by debating, it could be, by portfolio. Of course, it is dependent on the course, but just introducing a different way of.
Now, let's try and understand how we can leverage all this information to create enabling environments to support inclusion. The first thing is coordination, streamlining accommodations for students with specific learning disabilities across the university, facilitating individualized accommodations, talking to faculty, ensuring that these students are getting the reasonable accommodations that they need, working towards awareness and advocacy on specific learning disabilities and learning diversity. Individual tutoring should be available, and that is something that's going to supplement academic support. Career and placement related support should be available as well. On campus support, um, ensuring that these students feel included at campus, that they are managing independent living well. Awareness and inclusion workshops for clubs and societies on campus that extend beyond academia and extracurricular spaces should accommodate these students as well. Wherever campus handbooks are provided, these are resources that need to be available in accessible digital formats as well. On campus support needs to have support groups, buddy systems, mental health services in place for the students to avail. Technological support needs to be in place, providing access as well as training to assistive technologies, mainstreaming their usage in curriculum, workshops with faculty on assistive technology uses benefits should be held regularly. Technological assistance in terms of time management, schedule management, deadline mapping should be available as well. Research needs to be encouraged and funded, so advocating for centers of neurodiversity research and including neurodiverse scholars in those systems. Accelerating research in assistive technology innovation on SLDs. So again, inclusion for innovation is extremely important. And lastly, lobbying with organizations for partnerships, for grants, and for funding. To transition to higher education institutes supporting students, what you can do for that. So, the first pillar is academic support. Course material needs to be accessible. Swayam courses, for instance, need to be in accessible formats. Instructional aids like note takers, scribes, use of devices, etc., should be allowed and mainstreamed. Alternative assignment deadlines should be available. Accommodations during exams like compensatory time, having readers, preferential seating, and clarification of questions should be provided. Tutoring, academic tutoring, counseling should be available. There should be peer support in terms of academic support as well. In terms of student life, again, counseling support needs to be available. There need to be um, life, some sort of coaching in place for the students to navigate the overwhelming environment that comes with a college life. Availability of accommodations based on the initial need assessment at the time of admissions need to be in place. Availability of on campus champions to advocate for these students, that needs to be in place. Mental health support, faculty capacity building, and assigning campus buddies just to navigate campus life easily. That's something that needs to be available as well. There needs to be adequate access to resources, so schemes and scholarships need to be provided to students with specific learning disabilities. Saksham from EICT is already in place. There should be um, availability of AT as well as demonstration. There should be an assistance in making course material accessible. Employment and opportunities is also something that needs to be taken care of for the next set of transitions. So, providing information on all internships, placements, scholarships, etc., should be available. The placement process needs to be done in an accessible, inclusive way. The university or the institutes have to ensure that there is adequate employer sensitization, that they know, um, they understand the needs of these students and they are aware of their strengths and their skills. And lastly, relaying this information to students about inclusive employers and spaces that are available for them to access.
The whole idea behind universal design is that it's important for every student. And here in the Academic Center for Excellence at Bryant, we also have our support services for our international design with our faculty. We are finding that if we focus on just disability, it's harder for them because they see that as a small segment of the population. But if we focus on all students, and we also talk about our English as a second language students, that we can really show that universal design concepts can apply for them and can help them to learn more effectively in the classroom. So for example, even doing something like adding captions to your videos can help English, students who are studying the English language to know exactly what's happening in the classroom and to better access the material. Also, if we provide note-taking technology that students who may not be able to write quickly, whether they have learning disabilities or they aren't able to fluently write in English, are able to succeed. So it's really a matter of taking those universal design concepts and helping the faculty to know that it's not just students with disabilities. And university-wide, if we talk about this, it's much better than if it comes just out of my area, because they don't necessarily see that then as applying to the whole population.
So, design concepts need to be incorporated and mainstreamed. Um, and the reason why we need to do that is because when inclusive classrooms are designed well, interventions for students with specific learning disabilities help all students learn better. That is the idea behind universal design. And with that, we'd like to leave you with 5 very digestible actionables. So the first one is that start at the beginning, make admissions inclusive, increase the enrollment under the PWD category, and start tracking success stories of this group. Focus on sensitization and capacity building. Focus on all stakeholders from faculty, admin to students. Provide accommodations under the two C's, classrooms and curriculum. The fourth one is creating coordinating bodies, centers of support, be it disability support units or equal opportunity cells or centers of learning diversity. A coordinating body needs to be in place. This doesn't have to be a physical structure, but even a committee to begin with works. And lastly, consciously building a culture of inclusion at your institution. We hope you have enough takeaways from today's session, and that you don't miss out on the genius of the next big inventor or the next disruptor. Um, with that, we'd like to end today's session. We'd request all of you to scan this QR code to just help us assess the impact. It'll take 2 minutes.
Thank you, Bhavya. I would like to thank you, Changing, for very informative and interesting session in which you have taken the various examples of dyslexic children. And a dyslexic person has good communication power, good reasoning, but the problem solving is also good. But writing skills may be some problem. There was also the informative session about the RPWD Act 2016 and steps taken by the government and AICT for PWD students of higher education. That was really an interesting session, informative session. Thank you, Bhavya. Thank you, Changing.
Thank you so much. We'd like to thank AICT for their
And
endless support.
thank you all the participants who are attending the webinar.
Okay. Thank you so much once again, everyone, for joining. And thank you, AICT Garima ma'am, for all the support.